Ahu atu ia puku matama tēnei rā mātou o Māoriland te mihi atu ai kia koutou katoa me tā mātou ki whakatau mai ki tēnei wāhi tuari te whakaaro nui wāhi whiringa kōrero. Me taku mihi nui kia kaurua waku tuā hene hoi no e ngā manu kōrero kua tau nei, tēnei rā te mihi aka nei kia kaurua tahi. We're so privileged to have you both join us in sharing this session of Native Minds. And in a minute, I'll ask you to introduce yourselves. But just to say to our viewers, both in New Zealand, Aotearoa, and wherever you may be, Native Minds is our chance to just discuss some of the aspects of our modern world with a native filter. And so we're going to turn now to ask our guests to introduce themselves. And according to the Native Minds kaupapa, we asked them to do that by answering 3 questions. What is their name? What is their tribe or nation? And what they believe to be their reason for existence, their raison d'être, their personal kaupapa. And I'll ask first to our kia a koe na hoke hine, pa mau pe hei tīmata. Tēnā koe, ho?
Te whare etu nei au e karanga mai, te marae tā koto nei karanga. E te iwi he pai nei, tēnā rā kōtou katoa. E noho ana au I te roro o tōku whare, ko te reo mihi tērā. Whakarongorua rā ku taringa ki te tai o parengarenga, e āki ana te taha o tō mātou waka ko kura haupō tērā. Ka tītiro whakatiraki atu ki Murimotu, I hoki maharau ki Tūmatahina, me tana mahi ora I tiwi, e ai ki aia. Te kuaka marangaranga, ko tahi manu I tau ki te tahuna, tau atu. Anei, te tahi kuaka e mutu ana. He pononga ahau, e hoa mā, he pononga ahau ki te oranga tonutanga o tō tātou iwi Māori, te tuatahi. Tēnei toku raison d'être e hoa mā. Engari, ka huri au ki te reo pihikite, nā te mea, e pai aki te whakamarama mai ki te katoa. So, kia ora everyone. I come from the far north and I wanted to sing to you first because that's how we roll up into Heku Neha e te whanaunga. That's part of our tikanga as wahine Māori from Te Hiku o Teka. So that grounds me in who I am, and I'm a Māori child and adolescent psychiatrist. That's my psychiatry discipline is my Pākehā training as a doctor, and I'm a servant of our people. I have been given many opportunities, and I feel that that's my drive. That's where my energy comes from, and be interesting. I'm so looking forward to hearing what you're going to say too, Emma, around where do we get this energy to carry on, even when we know we're pretty had it. So that's my reason for being part of this, and I feel very honoured and privileged to have those gifts passed on to me by our tupuna to be in the role that I am now as their representative at this time. Kia ora mai anō tātou.
Tēnā koe, and you forgot to say your name was Hinemoa Elder. But tēnā koe te reo mihitangi ake ana te rongo ake nei ki tēnei wai aroha. You're a neighbour in a way, and you too are a neighbour in a way too, because your surname's birthed not far from here. Nā te kai a koe Emma, tēnā koe.
Kia ora koutou. Hari kua te ngākau ki te tū te wainganui a koutou mo te kaupapa nei. Ko wai au, ki te taha o tōku koro, ko Martin Wihipei hana tāna ingoa, ko tararua te maunga, ko ohau te awa, ko tainui te waka, ko Ngāti Tukorehe te iwi. Kia ora otaki. Ki te taha o tōku kuia, ko Kurawha tāna ingoa, ko Hikurangi te maunga, ko Waiapu te awa, ko Horauta te waka, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. Ki te taha o tōku māma, he Pākehā ia, no Ingarangi me Airani ahau. He māma ahau, Ko Nico, taku te mahine, ko ina Espiner ahau. He hape mea nui, he tākuta, he kaituhi ahau. E mahi ana ahau ki te hōhipera o Miromo, kei tāmaki makaurau. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koe, tēnā kaurua tahi. He rawe te rongo ake nei ki nei reo mihi o kaurua. Kia ora everybody. And thank you for the chance to discuss what's very much on the mind of the world at the moment. It's not hyperbole to say that there's a state of emergency. And one of the things that COVID has done, I feel, is cast an X-ray over the body politic and our corporeal and spiritual beings and shown us a lot of what's wrong. So our chance today too is to not just discuss health, but also to talk about it through your roles as doctors. In the Indigenous world, people who are healers are just a part of the whānau. But we live in a world that's rapidly urbanized, and we have access to, resources and infrastructures that are meant to heal us. And so the role of the doctor is a vital one in our society. And I was very moved by your tremendous series when Emma, when I think it was Te Awhimate Tāwhai said to you that there's a place for doctors. And so with that thought, I'd like to ask you, Hinemoa, if you could sort of kick off with your kōrero things. Tēnā koe.
Ka pai, nā mihi nui. Wow, the question on my mind has been, what does it mean to be a Māori doctor? What does it mean to be a Māori psychiatrist in COVID? And my first thought is that this is the new manifestation of an old foe. The Great Flu, so-called Spanish flu pandemic, killed around 50 million people around the world between February 1918 and April 1920. Our great-grandmother, Hinemoa, died in March 1919, 6 months after her baby Gus, our nanny's brother, was born. I haven't seen her birth certificate, and I don't even know how accurate that would be. But she's most likely one of more than 2,500 of our tupuna that died in that pandemic. Our Māori death rates at that time were 8 times those of non-Māori. And this also speaks to me of another important aspect. We call ourselves Māori. We speak of Māori rates, for example. And this has become a practice, a shared understanding, use of the kupu Māori, a strength in numbers approach, you might say. But as my nanny's example illustrates, this firmly places me in te Aupouri and Ngāti Kurī and te Rarawa in te Hiku. So with an iwi and hapu identity as my lens, I find myself naturally harking back to those times, to those experiences of our tupuna, those memories held within our whakapapa, which are reignited now. So the old foe returning, not only as a pandemic of infectious disease, but also in the ravages of the racist responses in pandemics and the impacts on our people. The recent age-based vaccine rollout being an obvious example of that. The many chapters of this COVID pandemic are asking different things of me, of all of us as Māori doctors, that's for sure. And calling on our cultural resources to help us to survive is at the heart of that, because COVID is a mental illness pandemic too. In the first lockdown last year, I was working at the Starship Regional Inpatient Unit, the Child and Family Unit as it is known, for our tamariki mokopuna and rangatahi, our children and teenagers with the most serious mental ill health. And suddenly, we couldn't have visitors in the usual way. Visitor numbers were down to 1 per tūroro, 1 per patient. And they had to remain on the unit until our patient was able to go home, which was completely uncertain and unpredictable. That depended on their recovery journey. Could take weeks. And we all found this incredibly disheartening and painful, because at the heart of what we do is we work with our whānau. And so using Zooms and not having whānau in the unit in person was really tough on everyone, especially, of course, the whānau themselves. Being the specialist in the unit meant I needed to be available in different ways for whānau on phone calls and Zooms, with rangatahi for much longer periods to provide more support, to take and make time to truly hear with my Māori taringa, with my Māori ears, all of the needs and the solutions. And that took a lot longer to develop. It was profound to hear the grief of uncertainty, and yet that was an essential part of what I was doing. The pain and suffering of the separation, the loss of not being there on the healing journey with loved ones, the loss of time, days rolling together in an eerie kind of Groundhog Day. We know that feeling. And alongside all the clear losses and feeling that something else was missing too, but not really able to put your finger on it, that ambiguity, defying a sense of resolution. I had to put on the PPE a few times, and when that came to the crunch, that was horrible. It was very distressing to see our patients looking at us like we were aliens, dehumanized, and knowing that the way we looked was actually making our patients more afraid. That was devastating. This year, in the Tāmaki lockdowns, I've been working from home doing Zoom clinics for Auckland District Health Board for the Kāri Centre, which is the name of the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. And what I see every day in my job is our rangatahi, our young people who are increasingly desperate. The new uncertainties are really complicating finding reasons to stay alive. Our whānau are both craving and rejecting closeness at the same time. Whānau are not having language for managing proximity and distance, feeling smothered and overwhelmed or rejected and abandoned. Really can't find the words to express that need for intimacy and also words for space. Whānau turning themselves into robots to try to cope, shutting down their need for connection as a coping strategy, only to find it impossible to open up those channels when it's safer. And whānau using more and different substances to try to numb their feelings. The fear of becoming infected, hospitalisation from COVID and death, touch, coughs, sniffles having different meaning. And of course, the fear for those who survive the phenomena of long COVID. So much uncertainty. Another thing that my clinical work has reminded me about is that we're a global Māori whānau. So relations passing away from COVID in other parts of the world, causing this ripple effect of anguish and pain. Their whānau back here unable to be with them, mokopuna witnessing their parents, completely losing control, the loss of sense of self, people feeling isolated in ways that they could never have imagined before, and contemplating life being too hard. And our so-called index patients struggling to find their way in all the turmoil, bearing witness to the whānau pain. So this thing that we call intergenerational trauma actually really coming to the fore and being exposed, the reality of it in the complex layers of uncertainty and loss. And it makes me wonder so much about the details and the subtleties of how our nanny's untimely death impacted her young tamariki's lives, and how that affected our nan and my mum and their resilience and their grief. And loss of mothers in our whānau, thinking about it again today. Mum's mum died when she was pregnant with me. My mum died when I was pregnant with my boy. So all of that comes up as a Māori psychiatrist. And actually, when I started med school, we watched a short video. It showed a Pākehā couple. She was heavily pregnant and going into labour, and he was the father of the baby. And the couple got in the car and began their journey to the hospital. The first sign that something was a bit different was they couldn't seem to read the road signs in Te Reo, and their pronunciation was pretty off too. And when they arrived at the emergency room, everyone spoke in Te Reo Māori to them. It was a short film, but it painted a really powerful picture, a small, stark reminder of the importance of our language and our struggles to communicate our health needs. This video that flipped reality on its head. And that was us at med school in 1993. that video, and yes, it was on VHS, gave me such a sense of possibility back then. It called to me of another world, kind of parallel universe where our people, no matter where we are, where we were in a process of decolonizing and reclaiming our Indigenous selves, could walk and talk and breathe our own Māori air. And it suggested to me that as Māori doctors, we could make a very real difference as Māori. Throughout my career, I've had periods of seeing that possibility come to life over and over again. I've worked to be part of joining activities to bring a safe Māori place, our Māori time, our Māori experience forward for our people when mental distress has brought them to a vulnerable place. And being a psychiatrist, I know full well I'm arguably the last resort, the least favourite specialist that anyone wants to see, especially for their rangatahi. And that's a good thing. You know, I'd actually like to put myself out of a job. I'd love to live in a world where we don't need psychiatrists, frankly. And I've seen how in so-called healthcare services, we should probably call them illness services, hospitals, and also in courts and in research, I've seen how short-term contracts and the work of good people has really made a difference, but then only to be a witness to that being wiped away when those contracts end and the money and the policy shifts on to a different focus. I've seen how the structures and the systems continue to signal, hey, leave your Māori stuff at the door, pick it up on your way out. Oh, but hang on, oh, we'll have a little bit of your Māori stuff. We'll dress things up, look Māori friendly, and really only to maintain power and control. And in contrast, I've seen how the use of our reo and our tikanga, our Pākehā, has really helped our young people with mental illness in the courts reclaim their healthy identity and take that ancient portable technology with them wherever they go. It keeps them well, keeps them grounded. I've seen how our research methods unleash kaupapa Māori evidence and action to better meet the needs of our people, especially in mate wariwari and dementia and traumatic brain injury. I've seen how our Māori public health doctors battle to show how the numbers speak to racist structures and poorer outcomes and early preventable deaths. I've seen how we've become experts in both worlds. We have had to. We've become proficient in the so-called evidence-based paradigm, only to see those in charge of the funds and the decisions continue to cherry pick the evidence they prefer. I found in my own research, examining traumatic brain injury for our people and developing tools for our recovery, that te reo Māori doesn't have to be understood to be a healing part of the journey. He rongoā tō te reo. So COVID's affected us as Māori as we're all painfully aware in our own unique ways. We haven't been able to go to tangihanga. For months, we've not been able to hongi, and we've not known when we really will be able to do those critical cultural activities again fully. Uncertainty has culture. So I turn to our cultural resources, our fundamentals, our reo and our tikanga. How do they help us in our whānau, the whānau that we serve, when we use our unique Māori perspective? There's so many Māori words for uncertainty. And it kind of makes sense to me because in that caution and in that reserve that was so clearly part of our tupuna's lives, that was kind of what kept them alive. So just a couple of examples I thought I would share. Rangirua, to this doubtfulness about two perspectives, literally two skies. How confusing would that be? Ngākaurua in the heart department, the sort of sense of being pulled in two directions emotionally. Pō nānatanga and pō kaikaha, the sense of the darkness creating a barrier to the eagerness, to the nurturing that then can't be brought to bear. So the language to me does clearly signal another source of possibility and resilience. And when we use our words, and I found this time and time again, when we use our words clinically, our kupu Māori for the different emotions that we feel, it does unlock different parts of ourselves, of our hinengaro, to help us find ways in all of the ways that we need to survive. So COVID's different from the Great Flu, And we've got a vaccine. And the vaccine, of course, raises yet more issues of uncertainty, does it not? As Māori doctors, we can be seen as part of the problem, perhaps considered to be propping up colonising tactics by supporting its use. It makes total sense to me that we're all deeply questioning of any mass response directed from government, especially in the existing racist health system, and how to navigate this as Māori doctors. Some may see this as straightforward, another balancing act, reducing the risk of getting COVID and death from it. But the communication of risk reduction is not an easy one. And we know that when we use logic alone, the numbers alone, it's not enough. It's necessary but not sufficient to help people make an informed decision. As Māori, we know the power of telling our stories. These are the stories that never get old. These are the ones that continue to resonate. They carry the power of naming, reclaiming those stories, not as the so-called myths and legends as we were told when I was growing up. And my mum clearly said to us, no, honey, those are real people, including the one that I'm named after. And reclaiming the names of our tupuna who died in the Great Flu pandemic. So I think naming the uncertainty in its new guise, reminding ourselves as our tupuna knew full well that life has always been uncertain and closure itself is actually the myth. We just like to pretend that life is more sure, don't we? When it really isn't true. Vaccines do not give 100% solution. They never have and they never will. We're learning to communicate uncertainty in its new form as Māori doctors, and it's a challenge. I briefly want to touch on our self-cares. As Māori doctors, we face unique demands and responsibilities, and we've really had to reflect on what it means to face this new combination of the tangible and the ambiguous losses. And we're tired. We're more likely to be irritable and distracted. I mean, we've always taken calls and messages at all hours, but now it's at next level, is it not, Emma? And how are we owning that? How do we discuss that openly? Is it safe for us in the different places we work and live? This is a time and place to have gutsy and perhaps awkward conversations about how medical teams retrench and become very risk averse in the face of all the stress and pressure. And what that risks are healthy choices as Māori becoming less and less considered when there's more stress on the system. And we have a couple of new structures coming down the pipeline, the Māori Health Authority and Health New Zealand, and some brilliant Māori leadership involved there. I wonder, among many other things, I wonder how those Māori doctors will be cared for, to do the work that needs to be done, to be vigilant, to manage their own uncertainties around how to affect the expulsion of racist policies and ideologies. So on this mutu whenua, it's a time for wānanga, how fitting that we're meeting today, for feeding our minds, feeding our wairua. Our manifesto as Māori doctors is to be clear about our purpose, which is fundamentally about working to dismantle and expel impacts of colonisation of the body, of the mind, of our whānau, and drawing together using our collective strengths to be whānau who can withstand this new form of uncertainty in this century's great COVID pandemic of infection and of mental ill health. How can we actually use COVID to strengthen who we are as Māori? As Māori doctors, we all have our own whānau and hapu ghosts of the great flu, rising up to haunt us and to help us. We represent our tupuna right now. We stand strong in our stories, our whakapapa. E ai ki te whakatauaki o kēngi tāwhiao, ki te kōtahi te kākaho ka whati, ki te kāpuia e kore e whati. Ngā mihi nui ki a koutou.
Tēnā koe hoa, tēnā koe. He rawe katoa te rongo ake nei ki ene kōrero huatau. And there's a lot that you said in there that will take a while to unpack in my mind. But I'm taken with the notion of this culture of uncertainty that we work with. And two, and by way of introducing Emma's contribution, I note, Hinemoa, placing the importance on stories and the power of the story to better our condition. And on that note, Emma, e hoa, kai a koe te wai nai nei.
Kia ora. Oh, e hoa. You should send me an invoice. Like listening to that kōrero was like the therapy that I really needed this week, you know. And every time you said we're tired, I feel so validated. I want to have a little tangi, so thank you. And actually being part of this kōrero, you know, this is, I've just come off night shifts, and these are technically my 3 sleep days that you're meant to have after a period of night shifts. And I haven't done any other extra mahi, which is difficult for me to say no to most things, but I knew that this would be, you know, healing as well as, you know, productive. So, you know, kia ora for the invite. So he poto tēnei mihi, nā te mea, you know, ko te mea nui kia hau te whakawhiti kōrero, te rāranga here o ngā whakaro. And it's really interesting because you didn't give either of us that much direction on, you know, what to prepare our kōrero on, but they're, as you'll see, strikingly similar, the themes and the conclusions. So yeah, I really just wanted to share some thoughts on the things that made it possible to become a Māori doctor and then to be a Māori doctor in our health system. And, you know, to acknowledge at the outset, you know, we know it's a racist system that's not contentious. It's been validated both through, you know, the whakaaro and experiences of our whānau and also in the, you know, peer-reviewed academic literature. So there's consensus on that front, both in terms of our ways of knowing and Pākehā scientific inquiry. So the choice to work within that system has to be a deliberate one, with eyes wide open to what that means. And on that front, I just want to talk about three different things. So the first is the whakapapa of Māori health in the Pākehā system, so knowing about that and our own positioning within that. The second is the importance of mentors. And the third is the challenge of that duality, so existing in those two worlds. So, I mean, the whakapapa for me really, MAPAS is the program at the University of Auckland, which supports Māori and Pacific medical students. And spookily, just this week, Whaia Ripeka Evans was telling me the other day about when the idea for MAPAS came about, you know, something like 30 years ago, and it was just a handful of Māori who had a vision for our people, including, I think, you know, the likes of Michael Walker, you know, who was one of the founding members of Ngā Tamatoa. So, you know, all of our activism is linked. There's no, you know, individual sectors in Te Ao Māori. Our relationships mean that we're all on every kaupapa. So it's incredibly powerful being part of that legacy. And knowing what someone's belief 30 years ago has made happen today, and understanding that there's a direct line between that belief and the record rates of Māori doctors that we're graduating now. But it is also something that we interpret as a serious obligation. You know, we want to make a meaningful difference for our people, you know, to shift all those statistics, you know, that we can recite in our sleep. You know, like there's no, I could go out and do a 20 tweet thread right now on everything I know about what's wrong. You know, we things like less access to GPs, fewer prescriptions, racist prescribing decisions by doctors for Māori, leading to less good treatment, less access to screening, dying earlier, all of that. You know, this is what occupies our Māori medical students' thoughts while we're learning organic chemistry and anatomy and physiology, you know. So it's something that we really take on, and it's not always easy. I was on placement up in Whangarei a couple of years ago, and one of the Māori junior doctors was telling me about how guilty she feels for not doing more. And, you know, as a junior doctor in my first year now, I know that we don't even, you know, we barely have time for lunch. And, you know, dismantling entrenched racism in the health system, you know, that'll take a bit more than a few hours, you know, in your incredibly busy week. So, you know, I wish that I'd known enough to have said to her back then that it's okay for her to just exist, you know, for a while if that's what it takes, because that visibility and having, you know, whakaaro Māori in those spaces is enough in and of itself. So yeah, she's probably not listening to this because she's at work, but that's what I would say. And to all our Māori med students and doctors that might be listening. And we also know that we need to fill the gaps that we bring, you know, in ourselves as a result of colonisation. So most of us don't have our reo. You know, some of us have never been home to our marae. You know, for me, I'm not matataui te reo Māori. And so I, you know, need to make sure that I'm taking steps to be tika and pono with what I'm talking about when I'm venturing into talking about, you know, Māori ways of knowing and being and all of this, because that's not something that I grew up with, but something that I've had to reclaim. that's okay too, you know, and that's relatable for many of our whānau. You know, our girl is now in a remaki unit at Kura. My Pākehā husband has learned te reo for her, you know, and if the most that I can do at the moment is listen to Scotty Morrison's Māori Made Easy on the way to work, then kei te pai, you know, that's enough for now. So I just want to talk about the importance of mentors. Now, I really, this is a favourite topic of mine, and I really think that Pākehā overcomplicate the idea of the tuakanga-taina relationship, you know, and what mentoring really means. You know, always trying to set up groups to connect people artificially and like create these connections. But for us as Māori, relationships are our superpower. So lifting one another up and passing on knowledge is just intrinsic to how we roll. And I don't also think that you need to personally know someone to decide that they're a mentor. So, Hinemoa, you have been a mentor for me before I met you. You know, and people like Ani Mikaere, you know, Linda Tuhiwai-Smith, even, you know, across the seas, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, you know, I don't know these wahine, but I'm being mentored by their whakaaro just the same. And who you pick as your po, that's really important. And it's because we're challenged constantly. And I'll pick this up in the third part of my talk when I talk about the pressures of working in predominantly Pākehā structures. But we're vulnerable to being rocked by forces outside of our control, you know, as minorities in this space. And it's really vital that we have strong leaders in the forefront of our minds whenever we're challenged. So for me in Aotearoa, it's people like you, Hinemoa, and, you know, it's an extraordinary honour to be sharing a panel with you. I hope you noticed that I'm being very chill about it. I think, you know, also, you know, in my immediate circle, people like Stacey Morrison, whose, you know, philosophy of generosity is paired with a really wicked staunchness. Someone like Gabriel Baker, who I was lucky to work with on our podcast a few years ago. And just as an example, like a practical example of how those relationships keep me grounded, I was talking to her last week, and Gabriel was asked to take part in a health hui. And she challenged those organisers to involve Māori not employed by the Crown, to ensure that it's not just those of us inside the tent whose perspectives are being heard. And I was like, oh, yeah, write that down. You know, that, you know, that's a good way to roll. You know, and that kind of deliberate response to power structures and taking a stance and face, and, you know, and when you're getting pressure to do otherwise, that's brave and strategic. And so our other Māori clinicians and academics, you know, the Paparangi Reid, Elena Curtis, Maxine Ronald, Suzanne Pitama, Jade Tamatea, Sue Kringle, every single one is someone we're thinking, you know, how would they respond to this? What are they saying is important for us to be focused on next, you know, as Māori working in the health system? And, you know, our, you know, Te Ora, you know, our Māori doctors organisation is, you know, has never been properly funded to do what it needs to do, but it's an extraordinary rōpū, you know, of support for us. And, you know, like reciting these names, it's not just name dropping my mates, but, you know, there's power in speaking each other's names and places and reminding people that we're many and that we're everywhere and we talk to each other. And, you know, linking back to what Hinemoa was saying, you know, about calling to one another, it's, you know, across time and space, it's an incredible, it's like magic. And finally, just thinking about that duality. So, you know, I've been thinking a lot, I haven't probably really shared anything in this corridor about what it's like to work, you know, in one of our, you know, most affected hospital during COVID. So we can maybe talk about that later. But I have been thinking a lot about the clash of the threat of COVID and our struggle for self-determination. And, you know, the corridor that came out of our iwi steering group for the COVID response, and that I've seen elsewhere, like among Māori who are supportive of vaccination as a tool to keep whānau safe, is that there is complementarity between our mātauranga and our ingrained understanding of public health measures like protecting our valued elders and our kids, and also using Pākehā technology like vaccinations. And so many of the things that protect us do come from our own knowledge. You know, the iwi boundaries happened of us, not of the state. You know, the deep knowledge of our communities, prioritising those who need help, making decisions to close marae, to do tangihanga different, all those things are intrinsic to us and would be appropriate in any infectious disease crisis. But this virus is not of us. You know, it was imported like the Spanish flu and many other diseases that came, you know, with colonisation. So we do need other tools to fight it. And that's where the vaccine comes in. And I think, I won't go on too much about vaccine hesitancy other than to say, you know, I've been double vaccinated. Both my parents, my husband, you know, make sure that my 7-year-old does as soon as it's MedSafe clears the vaccine for children. And just to finish this corridor around and reflect on that sort of duality, and to circle back to whakapapa and role models, I think the hardest thing is to remain tika and pono because it's beguiling, you know, being part of any privileged group. You have patients who accept anything you say just because you have the title doctor on your name badge. You have nurses that defer to your judgment sometimes. And, a society that elevates your opinions on pretty much anything simply because you're trained to do this one job. And that can lead any of us to being institutionalized, particularly as our privilege increases once we're in those spaces. And what we know about privilege is that it protects itself and wants to sustain itself. And so, it's exhausting, but you have to have eternal vigilance, reminding ourselves of the whakapapa, looking to our leaders across all our sectors who hold to our values and, and setting our course by those stars. So, kia ora.
Tēnā koe hoa. So you're saying, Emma, as you come to terms with dealing with people's high and elevated opinions of you and what you do and who you represent, that by constant recourse to the whakapapa and the story of what got you there in the first place assists you.
That's the anchor. And that, we're lucky as Māori if we're connected to our whānau because, they like that we've succeeded, but they're also not going to take any extra rubbish from us just because we're up there on this pedestal according to other people. So, that's another intrinsic sort of, safety check if you're Māori.
Yeah, that's a definite benefit, really.
Yeah, you're still doing the dishes.
Hey, Hinemoa, you mentioned before that that you had great faith in what you called some of the brilliant Māori leadership that's available to us in considering this new Māori health system, whatever shape that will be. And Emma made the point about needing to dismantle and I guess reconstruct systems. What are the without mentioning names, unless you want to, what are the qualities of that brilliant leadership that you talk to that will enable dismantling as much as reconstruction?
Pātairanga tira, tērā. So I think the Māori leaders who are involved have the qualities of all Māori leaders, really, in terms of, we are going into these things eyes wide open, as you've mentioned, Emma. People are very much aware of the battle ahead. So they're determined, they're smart, they're strategic, they're unyielding, they have certain aspects that are non-negotiable. And holding fast to all of the evidence that is absolutely clear as a bell around what we need as a people. I think those aspects, those traits are very much to the fore, and those people are not shy in making those things clear. I think the problem is there are some kind of big ticket item problems as I see it. There are a couple of kind of philosophical problems that then flow out. The two key ones for me that I think our leaders are going to have to grapple with, two of the central ones from my point of view, is one is the sort of mind-body split that is at the heart of how health services are conceived and delivered. That's how contracts are written up. When you go to any hospital campus, you see, well, there's the main hospital where the real medicine happens. And down the back somewhere, usually in a slightly dingy and maybe old building, that's the mental health part. And so I think that paints a very clear picture of what continues to roll on in all parts of the world. And we have our brilliant kind of whare tapawhā model, which is this tried and true model. It does speak to us about the connectivity of the four walls and of the whare. And I think we tend to focus on the four bits and not the fact that they're making a whare. And so it's the question that I think is at the forefront, or one of the questions at the forefront for these leaders, is how are they going to manage that part? Because I think that's at the heart of why we as Māori don't get our needs met in this thing that we call healthcare delivery. Whānau ora gives us the whole whānau ora concept, and whānau ora delivery gives us some examples of how that could be done differently. The other key problem, as I see it, is we still have an individual frame of reference about how health is measured, how health contracts are monitored, how health records are collected. We write things in our patient's individual health record. And I've been bringing this up for years now to say, well, hang on, we need a way, we need to wānanga ways in which we can best collect from a whānau's perspective their narratives, to name their stories and how they describe their journey of health and well-being. But we don't have a way to do that at the moment because of individual health recording. Not an easy one to solve.
I've had one question come in, Hinemoa, asking with regard to the whare tapawhā model, what insights, what Māori insights are in there that can benefit everyone. Could you explain it briefly, please?
Sure. So this is one of our other beloved leaders, Tā Mason Jury, summarised kōrero at a hui many years ago, and came up with this model that's ubiquitous in Aotearoa, called te whare tapawhā, the House of Four Walls. So tapa being the word for wall and whā being the word for four. And so those four aspects were highlighted in Tā Mason's summary, almost like a cartoon, if you will. Really, initially, I think it was designed to help non-Māori understand whakaaro Māori, about how we think about our own hauora, which is not in this sort of compartmentalized manner. So the four aspects are hinengaro, the mind, whānau, our relationships, our superpowers, our whānau, our families, our extended networks, our bodies, our tinana, and our wairua, our unique ability to be connected and to foster that. Some people might call it spirituality. I personally find that translation a bit narrow, but this unique sense of intuition, that gut feeling, the vibe, the connectivity with the universe. So what that model is exemplifying is, remember, there's more to health than the body. That's one thing. And that in order to create a holistic sense of self and to help people sort of check in with all aspects of themselves, there is this picture of the whare tapawhā. I also like to think about, well, what's the whenua that the whare is sitting on? and that whenua has whakapapa. So, you know, we can all say, oh, well, why aren't these aspects included in whare tapawhā? And I think we can embellish, and I'm sure that Tā Mason would encourage us to do so. These are some of the basic building blocks. I think one of the things that perhaps gets in the way of whare tapawhā is it's a very static model. And so we need to find ways to bring energy and action to it. How? In what ways do aspects of whānau and tinana and wairua and hinengaro interweave with each other? And those are the conversations that I have with people in my daily practice.
Well, I mean, that you, as you talk there to Hinemoa, it just reminds me of the power of metaphors. And I mean, whether you're talking about the land or the sky, this stuff can carry on. And again, that speaks to the power of stories. I'm just thinking for the moment, you mentioned, Emma, you know, not embarking on this career with, the whole eyes wide open kind of thing. When you think about the people like Te Awhimate Tāwhai, in what way, I mean, I'm just thinking that Sir Mason is one of these distant mentors, if you like, and as Te Awhimate was for you as well. So in what ways did they open your eyes further?
I just wanted to pick up on something just before I go to that question, just on whare tapawhā and then the shared stories and having, you know, the individual patient records thing. So I think one of the best things I did during med school was to get another job, which doesn't sound like the best thing to do when you're studying full time, but I went to work for a Māori public health NGO, Hapa Te Haora, and it just really, I mean, I'm a hospital doctor. I like working in hospitals, and the things that I like doing happen in hospitals, but hospitals isn't the place for whānau to get well. You know, it's to get through an acute illness. But the you know, the oranga happens out here, out in the community, and that's, you know, it was really instructive being with a Māori public health organisation, understanding that and looking at what's happening on the ground to try and support that. It's much harder to do because it's harder to measure, you know, as to your point around contracts, Hinemoa, and you know, our Māori organisations, their contracts are not sustainable. They've got, you know, increased auditing and compliance expectations, and so all of that just really prevents us from delivering these services in the way that's you know, that's best for our whānau. So that point, and then on the shared stories, that's such a cool thing to say, because, you know, whenever you talk to someone and you ask them for, you know, are there any diseases that run in your family, or what's the family history, you know, it never arrives in a you know, a genetic tree. You know, it's always, there's a kōrero about, you know, koro who, you know, was a boxer and an alcoholic, and then he died, and, you know, it's all wrapped up in the story. It's not, you know, oh, well, he had stomach cancer, he had bowel cancer, he had a cardiac arrest, you know, so those, you know, those shared narratives, I've got no idea how you do it. I'm getting a headache thinking about the logistical nightmare of creating that, but that's a really inspiring thing to say. And I think, you know, Mason and Te Awhi Mate and those guys, you know, there's just an incredible I think love from our you know, our rangatira for us juniors coming through, and that's probably the most uplifting thing, because, you know, even like I said, you know, Hinemoa acknowledging that we're all tired and it's hard and stuff, that's something we don't get from anyone else, and so, you know, it's their ideas and the inspiration and the setting a roadmap. And, you know, Tom Mason in particular is very good about like putting numbers on the paper and saying, right, in 30 years, this is what it's going to look like. But just loving us and seeing us is probably the most impactful thing that they do.
Kia ora. Hinemoa, one of the things that you mentioned earlier on with reference to the epidemic is the inability to go to tangi. I remember i te wai hingai te ronga kuia anti mate kaiwai. I couldn't get to the tangi engari tuku karakia i tau wai taku wairua. So what thoughts do you have about these changes to our tikanga that can still retain those trusty vibrations, if you like, but also make us good about changing our tikanga to achieve internal peace in these moments?
What's point? And I think various of our leaders, and I think of Te Wharehuia in this at this time, talked about, you know, in order to survive, the tikanga has to change. And so it does, and with that guidance from those esteemed leaders who are absolutely steeped in tikanga and can chart that safe pathway. We've known even before COVID that you know, we've had tangi live streamed, we've had all sorts of innovative use of technology to help whānau be connected at important times like tangihanga. So there is that flexibility, and I think over time that has been a part of our tupuna's ingenuity and ability to survive, but done in the right way with guidance from the right people. So as I say, I also am interested in how we can utilize COVID to strengthen our identity as Māori, and how we as Māori doctors can use the leverage of COVID to draw more resources to our services in our, you know, various parts of the country, our iwi, hauora, and to continue to demonstrate. I mean, it does wear me down, to be honest, from time to time, that we seem to have to continue to prove that these are the ways that we need to do things to actually improve Māori health and well-being. I mean, the proof of concept happened a long time ago, and yet we continue to be asked to prove again and again.
A business case.
Yeah. Well, yeah. A question just in, how can we as a whānau navigate the healthcare system in a way that honours us as Māori? Tricky.
There is no one way, I'm afraid. I wish there was. And as I also touched on, I think whānau ora has some keys here, and I would really like to see the whānau ora movement, if you will. And I think it is a movement about fundamentally tino rangatiratanga and health and economic well-being and flourishing is very much at the heart of that. I think, having the whānau ora approach across everything would enable whānau to navigate those systems seamlessly as Māori in the way they want to do it. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, we're not all the same. We use the word Māori as a shorthand to signal our connectedness and our collective strengths, but we're very diverse.
Well, here's another navigation question in a way that I'd like to put to you, Emma, that's come in. As a Pākehā, what can one do to facilitate Māori cultural identity with the Māori patient? What can one do in healthcare to help show that they have great respect and appreciation for a culture they're not born into? Different type of navigation.
Kia ora. You can support your Māori colleagues first. I think that's really important. I think it's been really, it was really interesting going through the 6 years of medical school because at the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism of those who came through the MAPAS program. There were lies that were spread amongst people around, we got answers to exams before other people and we got worse grades and all this kind of stuff. And then what you see over time with the leadership of Paparangi, Rhys Jones, Elena Curtis, Matere, as transformation. And that I couldn't overemphasize the significance of their contribution to changing our health workforce. And so people would come out the other end of med school like more radical than me, and this is the power of, having these conversations over and over deliberately, and helping people to understand things are different for some people. So in that respect, my Pākehā colleagues, some of them are fierce advocates and activists for our people, and they'll always be like, oh, this happened today and I didn't stand for it and I did this, and so that solidarity is key. For our patients, I mean, you just have to give it a go. Like, some of us like hearing kia ora, some of us don't want to borrow it, but I would lead with that, and see where you get. It's interesting. I got so Uncle Tippy did my tāmoko, as when I was doing the podcast, came home to Otaki to have that, and the key reason I got it was to connect me with my Māori patients because they kept not realizing I was Māori, and I was like, bloody hell, I went into this for you guys and you don't even know. But the interesting thing about it is that it's connected me with non-Māori as well. I've got these old Pākehā nannies who would touch my arm and say, oh, tell me about this, dear, and then they want to hear about my Nana Ethel, mum's mum, and and her whakapapa. So being open to being our true selves with people and letting that professional barrier down a bit is really effective for Māori. But I would argue that it's probably pretty good for everyone.
Well, as you say, mate, relationships are our superpower. So with a little bit of empathy and love and insight, I think you can go a long way as a sentient, caring, loving human being. Hinemoa, a whakaaro for you, and it's kind of deals in a way with this era of uncertainty we live with. The question is asking, essentially, you have a type of leader represented by Brian Tamaki, and the question is asking, really, how can it be countered with more authentic Māori leadership? Now, this is actually quite significant stuff given the circumstances at the moment.
Thank you. That is an excellent question. And so for me, the things that it brings forward are there will always be charismatic leaders. There will always be charismatic people who capture a certain aspect of need and are a conduit for that. And that may have a different kind of discourse from what we might consider to be a healthier, more adaptive, kind of a discourse which is around protecting our whakapapa, for example, to use the, I love the way you put it, Emma, the vaccination hesitancy in some of our whānau, some of our hapori. So I think guarding against, what I suppose is most helpful is building up the resilience of our people and building up the critical thinking in our whānui, so that we can tolerate openly a more robust discussion within our whānau, within our hapori, about what drives those sorts of fears when people latch on to certain kind of solutions which are actually potentially creating more problems for them. And I'm just, I want to be careful here in what I'm saying, because, everyone has a right to their own beliefs and to pursue those. But I suppose what worries me is that there are vulnerable people in our hapori who, in the most vulnerable state at times like this, are searching for some, perhaps the most vocal, the most seemingly strong and invincible kind of leadership. And how do we help our whānau to question that and to try to draw back perhaps the layers of that and what might be behind that? So I do think it does, it lays out a kind of a pātaritari to other leaders to be more vocal, to be more visible. And I think this is another aspect of our medical culture, and I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on this, Emma. In general, as doctors, we are taught both openly and covertly to not really talk in public too much. We're taught actually to just keep your head down, do your job, and, don't talk to the press.
It's so funny you say that.
That's the message.
I've done far less media this year than I did as a medical student, and because I'm worried, and suddenly it has implications for employment. There've been a number of opportunities, and I really, have thought deeply about whether, especially around the raru with Middlemore, because I feel, I'm sort of pathologically loyal, and I really thought that my hospital, had a hard time that wasn't warranted. But I've turned down all the interviews because it's that not sure whether this is going to be career limiting, which is funny because I had no fear as a medical student. But it's absolutely part of our culture, and it keeps us from our people. But then, opportunities like this are so important because this is a Māori space, and I trust who is involved, and so that's part of it as well. It's not just that we're taught not to, it's also that it's you're then and with a media background, I know that once you're a combatant, then you're fair game, not just from your employers, but in terms of everyone in the public as well. So
Another question just in, and it's a good question to actually finish our kōrero with. Is there space for frameworks such as mahi atua within mainstream health services? If so, what can be done to encourage these frameworks to be better accepted? Pātai pai tērā. So, Hinemoa, mā pēhe tīmata.
So I think this is a great question, and it opens up some other thoughts to me. The simple answer is, of course, there must be space. Anywhere that Māori where our people need to go and access support, we should be able to find frameworks, approaches like mahi atua. And I know Dr. Dai well, and I have huge respect for this program. So that's my first answer. Of course, it should be available. But my second thought is, and I've been part of Māori teams within, I don't want to call them mainstream because we're the mainstream. within the institutions of the government and how they're set up. And it's absolutely tough as to try to be kaupapa Māori within a DHB. And I say that Absolutely, honestly, and it'd be fascinating to hear from anybody else who works in kaupapa, trying to be kaupapa Māori within a DHB. It's really, really hard. For me, in South Auckland, I'm also very loyal to Tāmaki ki te Tonga. It felt like the DHB, no specific person, but it felt like the DHB dismantled everything we did every night. And so when we came in the morning, we had to rebuild everything. That is soul destroying. So I also think that another part of this question relates to what other systems need to be in place where frameworks and approaches like Mahi Atua can do their job and can also survive as kaimahi within those frameworks and spaces.
And I think, like critical mass is key for everything that we want to achieve. And so that's, that whakapapa too, when MAP has started up until now. And I know that, the University of Otago have their equivalent as well. There are, it used to be that you might have one somewhere on their own. Now there are, multiples. And we just have to keep bringing more of us through and finding those links as well. Like the cool thing at Middlemore is that we, we had a whakamana rōpū for the Māori doctors. But when we had our first hui, we also brought in, members of the Māori health team that sit in the admin offices. And I've made my way around as many of the nurses as I can as well, because we're not out there on our own. We've got a whole whānau of allied health workers as well. So just relationships. It's all relationships.
Hoi no rā kua tae ki te hakakaping o tēnei wā tātou kōrero. I just want to say how sad it is in a way to finish this kōrero, but how moved I am, not just with the wonderful things you've said, but Hinemoa, to cast my mind back nearly 30 years to when Peneahe Murray and I sat to support you at the beginning of your journey, and to be here to witness you at the beginning of your journey, Emma. The last generation has seen such growth in many ways, particularly with regard to capacity. And I think that's part of our story, it's part of our whakapapa, and gives me huge hope for the years and decades ahead. Nā reira, koe tēnei takumihi a ngākau ki a kaurua tahi. Me ki pēnei au, kua hoka ake ne ngā manu i te pai kōrero, waihu ai, ko te aroha me te mātau. Nā rea mihana ki a kaurua, me wā kaurua kupu, ngā tohu te aroha, ko titi iho nei ki te manawa. Nō reira, tēnā kaurua, and thank you everyone who's been participating in this session of Native Minds. Ki u tonu mai, hei kona mai. Kia ora guys, thank you.
Ora.
Love
Love that.